When John Glenn got hungry during his 3-orbit flight in 1962, he simply opened the visor on his helmet and popped a high-energy tablet into his mouth. This pill, a few sips of water, and an occasional squeezing of baby food from a toothpaste container were more than Glenn actually needed for the 4.5 hours he was in orbit. The purpose of the meal was to find out whether man could even eat in a weightless condition. Mealtime aboard those early Mercury flights was hardly more than a light snack. Yet even at that, it was considerably more sophisticated than the brown paper bag and thermos diet common to the earliest in-flight feeding during World War II. Since 1961, food scientists have been hard at work studying and developing space foods and measuring their effects upon man. The problems, even for short flights, have been enormous. Yet as we continue to launch longer and longer missions into space, entirely new considerations must be met and dealt with in planning and providing food for space travelers. How space food scientists are doing this is our story today on Science Reporter. The care and feeding of an astronaut is by no means a simple proposition. Elaborate provisions must be made for a life support system in which man can not only just stay alive, but can also function effectively while in space. The temperature, both in the cabin and inside the spacesuit, must be kept within critical tolerances. The astronaut must have oxygen to breathe, and there must be systems capable of removing carbon dioxide, toxic gases, and other waste matter. There must be an adequate supply of water, and the astronaut must have food. In many ways, this is the most challenging problem, since the amount he needs depends somewhat on what he has to do. Furthermore, he'll have no stove or refrigerator, no garbage disposal, and only a limited amount of space in which to store what food he will require. Well, these problems of space feeding were imagined by Jules Verne more than a century ago when he wrote a very entertaining story about a voyage to the moon in a spacecraft called simply the Projectile. Maybe because Verne was a Frenchman and presumably appreciative of the good life, he didn't overlook the necessity of providing his space travelers with a menu, one that was rather more elaborate than we are able to offer our 20th century crews.
The breakfast began with 3 bowls of excellent soup, thanks to the liquefaction in hot water of those precious cakes of bouillon prepared from the best parts of prime Argentinian beef. To the soup succeeded some beefsteaks, compressed by a hydraulic press, as tender and as succulent as if brought straight from the kitchen of an English eating house. Preserved vegetables succeeded the dish of meat, and was followed by some cups of tea with bread and butter, after the American fashion. The beverage was declared excellent, and was due to the infusion of the choicest leaves of which the Emperor of Russia had given some chests for the benefit of the travelers. And lastly, to crown the repast, Ardan brought out a fine bottle of wine, which was found by chance in the provision box. The 3 friends drank to the union of the Earth and her satellite.
It's unlikely that our astronauts will ever enjoy a meal like the one Jules Verne's crew ate, but to find out what scientific work has been going on in space feeding, we talked to Dr. Paul LaChance of the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas.
We have here a variety of the types of foods available for both the Gemini and Apollo missions. Here, for example, are some rehydratables, shrimp cocktail, which could also be a beef pot roast, potato soup, which could also be another powdered mixture such as a pudding, and a beverage, a grapefruit drink in this case, which could also be a cocoa.
Just add water and serve.
That's right. The bites we have are like the beef sandwich, which could also be a chicken sandwich or a cheese sandwich, compressed items such as a peanut cube, which could also be a cereal cube of some sort, and even a fruit cake.
Well, you seem to have quite a variety of items. I should think you could put together a fairly well-balanced diet for the astronauts.
Well, we do put a balanced diet together. However, it is based solely on empirical knowledge, or a good share of it is, in that it's based on the recommendations for the average American adult male.
These might not be what you actually need in space?
Well, the fact is that we do not know the requirement for all nutrients for man here on Earth. An example of this is for vitamins, certain vitamins, and certain trace minerals the recommendations are based solely on animal experimentation. In other words, there is no human data.
And you need this kind of data, you feel?
Well, yes, especially when you can't extract anything from your environment. You're up there with, you either take it with you or you don't have it.
I see.
So that one must study man and must study these nutrient requirements, assess the requirement in humans under resting, or as we call it, basal conditions.
This is just what you need to stay alive.
Exactly. And this will vary from individual to individual, and you must study that facet of the problem also. This is before you can introduce the elements of the new environment that you're going to have to deal with. For example, the stresses that you're going to have to deal with in this new environment of spaceflight.
What kind of stresses?
Well, let me show you. Here we see a series of stressors, as one might expect during a spaceflight. First, the effect of G-forces, as you would get on liftoff or on re-entry, as done by centrifugation.
This is the acceleration and deceleration during the flight.
Exactly. Here is an impact test, or as you would get on a hard landing, for instance. Here we see vibration. This occurs especially on liftoff in combination with the acceleration, and it may vary considerably with the type of booster.
Wouldn't be as violent as that, I hope.
No, here at this level we're seeing the establishment of tolerance limits. Here we see the effect of noise combined with a disorientation.
The noise of the rocket motor?
Yes, and also just the noise of friction as the, for instance, escape tower would function. Here is a study of altered atmosphere. Now this is long-term type stressor. This will always be present. 100% oxygen at 5 psi, for example. Or even mixtures of gases that we're now studying. Now this is an example of disorientation as one gets with tumbling, as probably well remember in GT5, especially when the power is off, the spacecraft tends to tumble.
Oh, I see. And you're likely to get dizzy, I suppose, if it kept it up.
Well, they probably don't notice dizziness, but you may be altering the vestibular apparatus, especially when you combine it with weightlessness. And this is the most critical, I think, and the least known factor of the spaceflight stressors, certainly the one of continued duration.
I could see how some of those stresses might make you lose your appetite for a few hours, but do they really affect your need for food?
Well, the short duration stresses probably do affect your appetite momentarily, but I don't believe they necessarily would affect your total nutrient requirement over any extended period of time. However, certainly those long duration stresses, the altered atmosphere, the weightlessness, and the radiation, which we didn't mention, the continued exposure to radiation or bursts of radiation, might singularly or in combination substantially alter nutrient requirements. Therefore, one must study what nutrient requirements are under basal conditions and then what they are with these stresses either individually or in combination, and then redo the whole thing in the actual environment of space. Then with this knowledge we can truly say we've established realistic nutrition criteria for the development of food systems.
To learn about research into nutritional requirements and how they are affected by the stresses of spaceflight, we talk next with Dr. Doris Calloway, Professor of Nutrition at the University of California at Berkeley.
We really do know something about nutrients and nutrient requirements. There are some gaps in our knowledge about qualitative things, what things are essential and what aren't. And we have even greater gaps on quantification for an individual person. But really we do know something. We get along with a limited amount of knowledge right here because we eat a wide variety of things, some things today and other things tomorrow, and a mixture of things at a given meal. Now with the astronaut population, we don't have this flexibility open to us to cover our area of less than precise knowledge because we can only send a limited array of things with the men, and if we have forgotten anything, we don't have a chance to go back and add it, or for them to get out somewhere en route and pick it up on their own.
Now, what are these essential nutrients that they must have?
The same nutrients that they sell in a loaf of bread. You know, it's protein for muscles and blood cells and hair and minerals for your skeleton, and some soft tissue functions, and vitamins to carry out metabolic processes, the regulators.
If you don't have these, you'll be in trouble eventually.
Serious trouble. Indeed, you will be.
Now, how do you find out what a human being actually has to have among these essential nutrients?
The very best way is to go into the laboratory and find out what a representative group of people needs. In our case, for instance, we often work with students on the campus. Would you like to see how we go about this?
Yes, I would.
Good. A group of test subjects, mainly students, in our penthouse laboratory at the University of California at Berkeley.
Looks like a very luxurious way to do an experiment.
The men enjoy it. You know, you look out at the Golden Gate through the window, too. Here they are at the dining table, and here is a man doing graded treadmill work, which is a standard every day for every subject, so that we can keep all things as constant as possible. And at the same time, he's learning his German as he plows up at 3 miles an hour on the constant treadmill. This is bicycle work, and in this case, we are just measuring the energy expenditure of the subject doing a known amount of work on the bicycle. By measuring how much oxygen he is using and how much carbon dioxide he puts out, we know what his energy expenditure has been.
So you can relate all this extra work to the amount of...
That's right. And we're interested then in how they handle their food metabolically, so that we analyze a lot of end products, and in these experiments we're trying to determine total body losses, which means that we analyze things that people don't normally, like bath water and whiskers and this kind of thing.
Well, once you know these basic nutritional requirements, is that all you have to send along with the astronaut?
No, the weight of these essential nutrients is really only a very small part of the total weight of food that we have to send. The protein, vitamins, and minerals wouldn't weigh more than 3 ounces even if we were liberal about it. Perhaps as little as 2 ounces if we're down to minimum. Now, the thing that determines this large bulk of food that we normally eat is our need for calories, for energy.
Well, what do we use that for?
For everything, for staying alive. The basal rate is what you use for mental activity and heartbeat and breathing and just necessary body functions, which you can determine quite easily. The basal metabolism test, I think you're probably familiar with.
How many calories would that come to, let's say?
It will depend on your age and size and sex and things like this, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 1,800 calories a day. And then in addition to that, whatever activities you carry out will demand some more energy. In the case of the astronauts, probably a rather sedentary life, being an astronaut, about 2,500 calories a day, or perhaps a little less than this even.
Now, if you need these 2,500 calories, why couldn't you put this all into a pill and give that to them to take?
You could, but you couldn't swallow the pill. The most energetic food that we could send would be pure fat, which would have 9 calories in 1 gram, and at this rate we'd need something over a ½ pound to provide the energy requirement. And that would be the size of a hockey puck, and, you know...
Well, if this most energetic food is fat, could you make the whole diet out of fat, then? Doesn't sound very
No,
appetizing.
you couldn't for other reasons. We already said we needed protein and
Yes.
minerals and vitamins. And in addition to that, you can't just utilize fat by itself. You have to have some other nutrient burning along with it. Otherwise, you get to feeling, headachy and nauseous. So that we must send some carbohydrate as well. So we've got about 2 or 3 ounces of essential nutrients and perhaps 2 or 3 ounces more of carbohydrate. So we're up to 6 to 8 ounces plus the fat then to make up the rest of the calories. Mm-hmm. And chances are we wouldn't send even that much fat along because it's just not palatable. And if we sent anything like what you normally would prefer as a composition, it will be something more than a pound of weight of dry food plus all the water and oxygen and other critical nutrients that you need.
Before spaceflight menus can be prepared, other considerations must be met. In order to find out about the development of food for space and the way it is packaged, stored, prepared, and eaten, we talked to Dr. Donald Westcott, Chief of the Cereal and General Products Section at NATIC.
The U.S. Army NATIC Laboratories and the Food Division has been working for a number of years on the development of food products for military rations. Many of the problems encountered in these developments are also applicable to some of the problems encountered in space feeding.
But are there special problems in space? I should think there would be that you don't meet on the ground.
There are a great many new problems which we have had to overcome in development of food products. To illustrate these, we are severely limited in the amount of weight and volume that we can tolerate. Also, there are severe environmental stresses, such as acceleration, deceleration, high temperature, compression, and things like that. To overcome some of these severe environmental problems, we have developed a series of nearly 50 different food items which can be used for space feeding. These can be divided into two major categories: a system of rehydratable foods, dehydrated by various means, typical of which is freeze-dried foods like these.
Oh, you can get some of these on the market now, can't you?
Yes, they are beginning to become available commercially.
What is this?
This is freeze-dried peaches.
This must be meat over here, it looks like.
Correct. That's meat and gravy.
Some vegetables, I guess.
Those are peas, and we have some corn. These are just samples of the type of items that are being used as freeze-dried items to be rehydrated. In addition, we have a great many bite-sized foods, which are compressed, dense, high-calorie source of foods, typical of which we have fruit cake, the sandwiches, beef sandwiches, and items like toast.
Now, how can you eat something like toast in a spacecraft without getting crumbs all over it?
Well, we've had to devise a system for coating the toast with a high melting fat coating, in this case, to overcome the problem of crumbs and disintegration. Another system which we are working on is actually packaging the bite in an edible film.
Well, this isn't cellophane, then?
No, by no means. This is an edible film made from a starch product and can be eaten as is. In fact, it's actually nutritious.
Now, I can see how you'd eat these bite-sized items just by opening the package and eating them, but what do you do about these rehydratable items? You can't very well eat them off the plate with a knife and fork.
Well, all the food comes packaged in a unit such as this, which is a meal for one day, one meal for an astronaut. Inside, we have the series of packages. This is an example of a rehydratable package. The astronaut cuts the end of the package off and then inserts the water gun, metering in the required amount of water to rehydrate the product.
Speaking of adding water, I don't see how you're really saving any weight if you have to add the water back again before you can eat the food.
That's correct. At present, we have to carry sufficient water both for drinking and rehydration. But we are working on systems such as using the water from fuel cell byproduct for rehydration and drinking, and also systems for recycling water.
Now you have here, this is grapefruit drink, right?
Yes, this is grapefruit drink.
5 ounces of water, 2 to 5 minutes. What's that for?
Well, it requires a certain length of time to ensure that the material is, in this case, the beverage is dissolved in the water. The package is needed to aid rehydration, and the one-way valve prevents water from flying around the capsule.
If that's the one-way valve, then how do you drink the grapefruit juice?
After it's rehydrated, the other end is cut, and a feeding tube is removed from the package, where the astronaut inserts this directly in his mouth.
You squeeze it like toothpaste?
Correct, and drinks the product. Actually quite delicious.
Now, what do you do with this after you're through? You can't very well throw it out the window.
No, attached to the package is a germicide pill, which is inserted into the package after the product is eaten to prevent residual decomposition and odor formation and fermentation and like. Then the package is merely wrapped up and put in a disposal container.
Knowing the kinds of foods which can be prepared, stored, and used in the spacecraft, and the nutritional requirements of the astronauts, dietitians can begin to prepare menus that are suitable for space. To learn more about menu preparation and acceptance testing, we talked to Mrs. Mary Klicka, a nutritionist at Natick. You know, Dr. Calloway has told us about these essential nutrients we require and the calories we need for energy. And Dr. Westcott has displayed some 50 different, what I assume are nutritious items to choose from. Now, how do you put all this information together and come up with a menu?
Well, of course, NASA gives us the requirements for the menu, and then the length of the mission is quite important to us since it more or less determines what variety we need on the menu. The longer the mission, the more variety you need to assure acceptability and consumption throughout the flight.
So you wouldn't want to use the same menu every day, even if it were nutritious. They'd get bored with it.
That's right. cube or volume of the food is important too. This is also related to the length of the mission. The longer the mission, the more concerned you are with the amount of space the food takes. For example, in rehydratable foods, while they're very acceptable, they require much more cube than the bite-sized items.
I see. Now, you say acceptable. Do you know what the astronauts like in the way of food?
We get their preferences before flight. We actually check out a menu with them to be sure that they will eat and like everything on the menu before it is accepted for flight use.
Well, now, what other factors do you have to take into consideration?
Texture of the foods, good menu combination. We're as concerned with feeding the astronauts good sounding combinations of foods as the housewife is in feeding her family these.
Oh, I see. You wouldn't want to serve peas and chocolate sauce, no matter how nutritious they were.
It doesn't sound good.
No, all right.
We're also concerned with low gas production, foods that don't cause distress. We're concerned with color of food, and we're concerned with the acceptability of the food.
Well, now, how do you find out, other than actually trying this food on an astronaut, its acceptability?
We test each individual item separately. In fact, these are the booths behind this wall where the testing is done. The tester is given a sample of the food, then he is tastes the food, and then he rates it on a card, telling just exactly how much he likes or does not like this particular food. Then we average these values, and we find out how the average consumer would like this particular type of food. Would you like to taste this?
Mm-hmm.
The peanut cube. The astronauts like those.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. This is the Life Support Systems Evaluator at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. It was designed to aid in research conducted to determine precise nutritional requirements, to evaluate foods planned for long-term space flights, and to investigate personal hygiene procedures. It is manned by 4 subjects, 2 of whom are required to wear an unpressurized spacesuit constantly for 16 days. The subjects' activities were under constant surveillance 24 hours daily. Temperature, humidity, and other environmental variables were checked periodically by the chamber operators. All diets were scientifically formulated, and each portion was weighed to the nearest 1/10 of a gram in order to determine the precise balance between intake and waste. Once daily, food was passed into the evaluator by way of its airlock. Waste matter was disposed of in the same way. A 3-day diet cycle of pre-cooked, dehydrated food with bite-sized compressed items and a matching, freshly prepared diet were compared for nutritional value as well as for subject acceptance. The dehydrated foods were packaged in metal foil envelopes to retain flavor and freshness. The results obtained showed that dehydrated and bite-sized foods were very acceptable for potential use in aerospace systems. In addition to testing the food itself, the packaging, storing, preparation, and disposal means are also tested to determine how well they will work in the spacecraft. As we've seen, foods for spaceflight may be bite-sized, freeze-dried, or dehydrated, as shown here. Each item is fully tested by a suited astronaut in a spacecraft simulator before the food item is approved for use. Dehydrated foods must be reconstituted with water before consumption. The supply of water comes from the fuel cell, of which water is a byproduct. A hose with a nozzle is located between the astronauts in this Gemini capsule mock-up. As soon as the astronaut has finished his meal, he inserts a special germicide pill, which comes with each bag, into the opening and mixes it with the remaining food to retard spoilage. The remains are then stored for the balance of the trip. Here the astronaut is opening a packet of bite-sized items. These may be either freeze-dried or compressed foods. Each item is thoroughly ground-tested in these mission simulators before being allowed to go on an actual mission. Under these situations, technicians can determine packaging faults, convenience in handling, stowage problems, compatibility with other systems, and general reliability before the item is sent into space. Present technology of space feeding is well enough developed for missions of even a month's duration. But new problems begin to arise when considering an extended mission to perhaps another planet. To find out about research in this area, we talked again to Dr. Paul LaChance.
For extended missions, the critical factors are space, weight, and power. This being the case, the idea, the concept of reusing what you have in the spacecraft becomes the optimal approach. First, you would try to recycle the water, then probably the oxygen by, for instance, recovering the CO2 and extracting the oxygen from it. And the regeneration of food becomes an important factor. However, this has to be taken in a series of steps. Probably the first approach would be to compress foods, which we are now doing, and therefore reduce the volume for storage. Then we would try to introduce items such as these prototype foods here, the nutrient-defined diet. This would be a diet with just the essential ingredients keyed to the man's requirement.
You'd leave out the fibers and other things in food that you can't digest anyway?
Right, correct. And we would make it available as a powder to be reconstituted and made into a liquid to drink, or it would be the identical ingredients in form of a candy or even a cookie. From that step, you could introduce into this synthetic compounds, synthesized essential amino acids, for instance, or even foreign compounds, such as some products, byproducts of the petroleum industry.
These might actually have more nutrient value per cubic inch than nature's own foods?
That's right. That would be the purpose of doing this. And of course, lastly, one would get into the true closed ecological system in the biological sense, which would be the use of algae, fungi, higher plants, bacteria, or a combination thereof, where you would have essentially a small farm in space, or a microcosm, as we call it. You would produce your own food, and you might, of course, concurrently regenerate oxygen and pick up CO2.
Thank you very much, Dr. LaChance. Today we've been visiting the U.S. Army Natick Laboratories in Natick, Massachusetts. Our guests have been Dr. Paul LaChance of the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Dr. Doris Calloway of the University of California at Berkeley, and from the